A visual novel is an interactive fiction game featuring mostly static graphics, most often using anime-style art or occasionally live-action stills. As the name might suggest, they resemble mixed-media novels. In Japanese terminology, a distinction is often made between visual novels proper, which consist predominantly of narration and have very few interactive elements, and adventure games, which may incorporate problem-solving and other types of gameplay. This distinction is normally lost outside Japan, where both NVLs and ADVs are commonly referred to as visual novels by international fans. Visual novels and ADVs are especially prevalent in Japan, where they made up nearly 70% of the PC game titles released in 2006. Visual novels are rarely produced for video game consoles, but the more popular games have occasionally been ported to systems such as the Sega Saturn, Dreamcast, PlayStation Portable, or Xbox 360. The more famous visual novels are also often adapted into the light novel, manga or anime formats. The market for visual novels outside of East Asia is small, though a number of anime based on visual novels are popular among anime fans in the Western world. Gameplay. Visual novels are distinguished from other game types by their extremely minimal gameplay. Typically, the majority of player interaction is limited to clicking to keep the text, graphics and sound moving. Most visual novels have multiple storylines and many endings. The gameplay mechanic in these cases typically consists of intermittent multiple choice decision points, where the player selects a direction in which to take the game. This style of gameplay has been compared to the gamebook books. Most, however, strive for a higher level of plot and character depth than the aforementioned series of interactive children's books. These can be more closely compared to story-driven interactive fiction. While the plots and storytelling of mainstream video games is often criticized, many fans of visual novels hold them up as exceptions and identify this as a strong point of the genre. Some visual novels do not limit themselves into merely interactive fictions, but also incorporate other elements into them. An example of this is Symphonic Rain, where the player is required to play a musical instrument of some sort, and attain a good score in order to advance. Usually such an element is related as a plot device in the game. Some shorter works do not contain any decision points at all. Most examples of this sort of fan-created novel games are reasonably popular. There are a number of free game engines and construction kits aimed at making them easy to construct, most notably Nscripter, Kirikiri and Renpei. Many visual novels use voice actors to provide voices for the characters in the game. Often, the protagonist is left unvoiced, even when the rest of the characters are fully voiced. This is to aid the player in identifying with the protagonist and to avoid having to record large amounts of dialogue, as the main character typically has the most speaking lines due to the branching nature of visual novels. Branching narratives. Non-linear branching storylines are a common trend in visual novels, which frequently use multiple branching storylines to achieve multiple different endings, allowing non-linear freedom of choice along the way. Decision points within a visual novel often present players with the option of altering the course of events during the game, leading to many different possible outcomes. An acclaimed example is 999, 9 hours, 9 persons, 9 doors, where nearly every action and dialogue choice can lead to entirely new branching paths and endings. Each path only reveals certain aspects of the overall storyline, and it is only after uncovering all the possible different paths and outcomes through multiple playthroughs that everything comes together to form a coherent, well-written story. The branching path stories found in visual novels represent an evolution of the choose-your-own-adventure concept. The digital medium allows significant improvements, such as being able to fully explore multiple aspects and perspectives of a story. Another improvement is having hidden decision points that are automatically determined based on the player's past decisions. In Fate, Stay Night, for example, the way the player character behave towards non-player characters during the course of the game affects the way they react to the player character in later scenes, such as whether or not they choose to help in life or death situations. This would be far more difficult to track with physical books. More importantly, visual novels do not face the same length restrictions as a physical book. For example, the total word count of the English fan translation of Fate, Stay Night, taking all the branching paths into account, exceeds that of The Lord of the Rings. This significant increase in length allows visual novels to tell stories as long and complex as those often found in traditional novels while still maintaining a branching path structure, and allow them to focus on deep stories with mature themes and consistent plots in a way which choose-your-own-adventure books were unable to do due to physical limitations. Visual novels with non-branching plots, such as Higurashi When They Cry, Planetarian, The Reverie of a Little Planet, MUV Love Alternative, Juniper's Knot, and Digital, A Love Story are rare exceptions within the genre. Many visual novels often revolve almost entirely around character interactions and dialogue choices, such as Ace Attorney and Tokimeki Memorial, usually featuring complex branching dialogues and often presenting the player's possible responses word for word as the player character would say them. Such titles revolving around relationship building, including visual novels as well as dating sims such as Tokimeki Memorial and some role-playing video games such as Shin Megami Tensei, Persona, often give choices that have a different number of associated mood points, which influence a player character's relationship and future conversations with a non-player character. These games often feature a day-night cycle with a time scheduling system that provides context and relevance to character interactions, allowing players to choose when and if to interact with certain characters, which in turn influences their responses during later conversations. As early as 1983, Portapia Serial Murder Case featured non-linear elements, which includes traveling between different areas in a generally open world, a branching dialogue conversation system where the story develops through entering commands and receiving responses from other characters, and making choices that determine the dialogues and order of events as well as alternate outcomes, though there is only one true culprit while the others are red herrings. It also features a phone that could be used to dial any number to contact several non-player characters. The game was well received in Japan for its well-told storyline and surprising twist ending, and for allowing multiple ways to achieve objectives. Another more non-linear early example was Mirrors, released by Soft's Studio Wing for the PC 8801 and FM Towns computers in 1990. It featured a branching narrative, multiple endings, and audio CD music. It is not uncommon for visual novels to have morality systems. A well-known example is the 2005 title School Days, an animated visual novel that Kotaku describes as going well beyond the usual black-and-white choice systems, where you pick a side and stick with it, while leaving the expansive middle area between unexplored. School Days instead encourages players to explore the gray, neutral middle ground in order to view the more interesting, bad endings. A common feature used in visual novels is having multiple protagonists giving different perspectives on the story. Seaware's Eve Burst Error introduced a unique twist to the system by allowing the player to switch between both protagonists at any time during the game, instead of finishing one protagonist's scenario before playing the other. Eve Burst Error often requires the player to have both protagonists cooperate with each other at various points during the game, with choices in one scenario affecting the other. Fate, Stay Night is another example that features multiple perspectives. Chunsoft sound novels such as Machi and 428 FUSA Sarita Shibuya developed this concept further. by allowing the player to alternate between the perspectives of several or more different characters, making choices with one character that have consequences for other characters. 428 in particular features up to 85 different possible endings. Other notable examples of nonlinear storytelling include ELF's most famous visual novel, You Know, A Girl Who Chants Love at the Bound of This World, which featured a science fiction plot revolving around time travel and parallel universes. The player travels between parallel worlds using a reflector device, which employs a limited number of stones to mark a certain position as a returning location, so that if the player decides to retrace steps, they can go to an alternate universe to the time they've used a reflector stone. The game also implemented an original system called ADMS, or Automatic Diverge Mapping System, which displays a screen that the player can check at any time to see the direction in which they are heading along the branching plot lines. Similar systems have later been employed in the 2010 role-playing games, Radiant Historia and the PSP version of Tactics Ogre. RPG hybrids. There have often been role-playing video games that feature visual novel-style elements. A well-known example in the West is Lost Odyssey, a role-playing video game that features a series of visual novel-style flashback sequences called 1,000 Years of Dreams, which were well received in the West. These sequences were penned by an award-winning Japanese short story writer, Kiyoshi Shigematsu. Another title is the Arc System Works fighting game series BlazBlue, which plays off of a complex fantasy setting where a 100-year period is reset indefinitely with many variables. The many branching storylines in story mode can serve as standalone stories, but players must consider them together along with arcade mode stories to be able to fully understand the universe. Another successful example is Sega's Sakura Wars series, which combined tactical role-playing game combat with visual novel elements, introducing a real-time branching choice system where, during an event or conversation, the player must choose an action or dialogue choice within a time limit, or not to respond at all within that time. The player's choice, or lack thereof, affects the player character's relationship with other characters and in turn the character's performance in battle, the direction of the storyline, and the ending. Later games in the series added several variations, including an action gauge that can be raised up or down depending on the situation, and a gauge that the player can manipulate using the analog stick depending on the situation. The success of Sakura Wars led to a wave of games that combine role-playing and visual novel elements, including Thousand Arms, Riviera, The Promised Land, and Luminous Arc. A similar type of real-time conversation system also appeared in the Sega-published action role-playing game Alpha Protocol. Another example is Sentogakuin, which combined elements of both MMORPGs and visual novels. Style. The visual novel genre has evolved a style somewhat different from print novels. In general, visual novels are more likely to be narrated in the first person than the third, and to present events from the point of view of only one character. It is fairly common for the primary structural unit to be the day rather than the chapter, with formulaic awakenings and returnings to bed framing each day's events. There are of course many exceptions to these generalizations. In the typical visual novel, the graphics comprise a set of generic backgrounds, with character sprites superimposed on these. The perspective is usually first person, with the protagonist remaining unseen. At certain key moments in the plot, special event CG graphics are displayed instead. These are more detailed images, drawn specially for that scene rather than being composed from predefined elements, which often use more cinematic camera angles and include the protagonist. These event CGs can usually be viewed at any time once they have been unlocked by finding them in-game. This provides a motivation to replay the game and try making different decisions, as it is normally impossible to view all special events on a single playthrough. Up until the 1990s, the majority of visual novels utilized pixel art. This was particularly common on the NEC PC 9801 format, which showcased what is considered to be some of the best pixel art in the history of video games, with a popular example being Policenauts in 1994. There have also been visual novels that use live-action stills or video footage, such as several sound novel games by Chunsoft. The most successful example is Machi, one of the most celebrated games in Japan, where it was voted No. 5 in a 2006 Famitsu Reader poll of top 100 games of all time. The game resembled a live-action television drama, but allowing players to explore multiple character perspectives and affect the outcomes. Another successful example is 428. FUSA Sarita Shibuyada, which received a perfect score of 40 out of 40 from Famitsu magazine.